I work for an MSP, so we handle a ton of clients. One client has an IT coordinator that's our main point of contact for all tickets. The client has determined that individual users are no longer to send us tickets directly, but they will instead send to this guy, and he will determine which need to come to us and which can be handled by him in-house. He is useless. Utterly useless. The client would get the same results by just auto-forwarding his email to our support email address and firing him. His most recent ticket was about a new user getting set up. He said, and I'm pulling direct from the ticket. Manager / informs me there's a new hire starting next week. This is the first I've heard of it. I don't know what computer she'll be using, but it needs application / installed. Cool. If only there were someone there, like some sort of IT coordinator or something, who maybe has direct access to communicate with people on site there. I replied back asking for some additional information, like a name. His reply. Manager / could best answer these questions. You should reach out to her. I reach out to the manager and leave a message. I do so for the next 2 days. Finally, the IT coordinator gets back to me. Let me clear up some confusion. I spoke to manager / and she says the new user already has a desktop, the only thing left to do is attach her email to the computer. She won't need any additional setup or licensing. My brother in Christ, what is her name? What computer is she on? What on earth are you coordinating? I send back a politely worded email just asking for a name and computer. I do not have that information readily available. Manager / knows. Give her a call. So I do. And I finally reach her. The computer was already set up last week by one of my other techs. I do a quick once-over to make sure everything is working and call it today. I send a reply back to IT coordinator to close up the interactions. His reply. Thank you. Could you reach out to manager / and see if she's moved the new user's desktop to the admin area? Motherfucker, that's your job. Your whole ass job. The entire reason you make $110,000 a year. Paid for by my taxes. Earlier this year, I was hired on at a small factory to provide IT support. This mostly consists of working support tickets, update software, Windows versions, create user logins for the software they use in production, but I get called out to the line for various reasons people think are related to IT. So, one day I'm in my office going over some notes about an upcoming project when I get a call to come down to maintenance. When I get there, the maintenance tech tells me that their big bay door wasn't working, and wants me to look at it. I don't know anything about doors. Well, it's your department, so you need to find out how to get it working. How on earth does a bay door fall under the IT umbrella? It uses electricity, doesn't it? So does a toaster, but you don't call IT when your bread isn't browning. Eventually another maintenance tech was walking by and heard our commotion. He sprung into action. Apparently the little laser sensor comes loose sometimes. About a week later I get called out to the line urgently because a piece of equipment isn't working. Same maint tech from before. After checking it out, it appeared the programming wasn't doing what it's supposed to. I'm entry-level IT, I'm not messing with the coding of a piece of production equipment. Yeah, I'll get a hold of engineering. Well, that's technically your job. If that was my job, I'd be doing it. That's above my pay grade and I'm not getting fired for screwing up something the line can't run without. So you're just passing your work off again? Listen, if it connects to the internet and you're having problems with it, it's an IT issue. Other than that, it's not my department. This maintenance tech continued to call me about things that were obviously not IT, including, but not limited to, an HVAC system, the huge bay door, again, a forklift, and most recently because he received a ticket to mount TVs. When I explained to him IT only does the cable drop, maint does the actual hardware mounting, it once again caused a kerfuffle that I needed to call his boss to explain that if it was my job to mount the TV, he wouldn't have gotten the ticket for it. I'll be honest, I thought you were all lying to me. I thought you were just coming up with the weirdest thing you could think of a user doing. But today I learned that the stories were all true. It was just a standard tower replacement in our usual refresh cycle. I did the same thing I've done over and over already. I ran our user migration tool on the old computer, then I set up the new computer and ran the tool again to restore the files. I made sure the user could access her emails, made sure her browser favorites showed up properly, got her printer installed, and then I was on my way. By the time I got back to my desk, I was getting messages from her demanding that I bring the old computer back because all of her files were gone. While I'm loading up her old HDD, I tell her that sometimes the user migration misses files that were in non-standard locations and ask where the files were located so I can retrieve them for her. She says she's missing hundreds of files and they were all on the desktop. Now, I saw her desktop earlier and I know there weren't hundreds of files there, thankfully, so I figured they were in a folder. And that's when memories of this subreddit flooded back to me and I decided to look in the recycle bin. Sure enough, there are hundreds of files there, so I take a screenshot and ask her if these are the missing files. Of course they are. That's obviously where you want to keep your important files so you can reuse them. So now I get the joy of trying to explain why it's a bad idea to store files in the recycle bin. Maybe if I'm really lucky I can convince her to actually use our cloud storage, but I won't hold my breath. Edit. So I explained to her that the recycle bin was meant for deleted files, true, and that several times in the past the company had discussed setting up a policy that would automatically empty the recycle bin every week, a lie. That, combined with the scare of all her files being missing, seemed to drive home how precarious it was to keep files there. I moved her files to cloud storage and set up a shortcut to it right next to the recycle bin and named it Files to Reuse in the hopes that she will get in the habit of using that instead. Luckily she put files in the recycle bin by dragging them, not by using the delete key, so I don't have to worry about that at least. Way back in the late 90s I worked as a software developer for a tech company in the Pacific Northwest that produced portable data logging devices. These were battery-operated, self-contained units that monitored things like temperature, humidity, etc. One of our product lines was certified intrinsically safe, as it was completely encapsulated in silicone and had no electric ports. Instead, it had an optical port and you could communicate via light wand. The unit was popular as its construction essentially made it waterproof. We sold these units all over the world and one of our clients was a refrigerator manufacturer in a South American country. They would put the unit in the freezer compartment of a fridge on the production line as it ran through a test freeze and defrost cycle. Then they would retrieve the information at the end of the production line to verify that the fridge was working within specification. Normally, downloading the information would take seconds, but on occasion, the device would have trouble communicating and would take several minutes to download the data. This was a problem since it slowed down the entire production line. Our tech support guys were unable to help the customer. We could not reproduce the problem here. The issue was passed to us in development, both hardware and software, but we could not duplicate it either. So the client offered to fly an engineer to their location and put them up for a week. Our company asked for volunteers and I decided to go. It was a very long flight, but I arrived at a surprisingly clean and modern airport and was put up in a 4-star hotel. I was assigned a driver and an interpreter. The next day, I was driven to the client's plant. After passing through security, I was shown the station where the devices were downloaded. And that's where I spotted the problem. Remember, the units had no electrical ports and only communicated through an LED for both transmission and reception. The company was removing the units from the freezers and putting them on a table, right underneath a large fluorescent fixture that was only 2 feet above. I immediately realized that the light fixture, which would have been flickering at 50 Hz, was tricking the occasional unit into communicating. Once it goes into the communication cycle, then plugging in the light wand simply confused it until it had a chance to reset a couple of minutes later. So I told them to turn the devices face down on the table. That prevented the light from triggering them. I also reported my findings back home and we worked out a new firmware protocol to eliminate the problem in newer devices, but simply placing them face down until it was time to plug in the light wand solved the issue. I spent the next few days touring the city and buying souvenirs. The client also paid for a really nice meal at an Argentinian-style meat house. I could have stayed the whole week, but I wanted to get back, so they exchanged my ticket and sent me home after 4 days. The thing is, We would never have thought of this back home. Sometimes you really have to be on site to figure things out. P.S. While I was there, they mentioned another issue. Employees were occasionally stealing the units. Apparently they liked using the magnetic-backed devices as fridge magnets, especially since the flashing LED indicating a full device looked cool. They asked how much it would cost to install RFID trackers or even cell phone trackers into the units to reduce theft. I simply told them to remove the magnets, they weren't using them anyway, and to turn off the LED blinking via a software command. After that, I don't think any more were stolen. All the recent posts about terminals reminded me of this story from about 1996, so here I am to share. I worked for a manufacturing company. They'd standardized on DEC in the 80s, and by the time I was there in 96 there were still serial terminals all over the place, though mostly as an adjunct to a PC. Well, except on the production floor. Down there it was all green screen-wise. The guy in charge of the area was both resistant to change and important enough to get his way, so it remained frozen in 1983. I'd been on the job barely a month when I got the job of replacing a keyboard down on the production floor. Yeah, the keyboard was manky, discolored with God only knows and slightly bent to boot, but that wasn't the worst thing about the terminal. A decade of burn-in had rendered the screen nearly indecipherable. So I went to the storage closet and snagged him a newer white phosphor WA160. A week goes by, and Mr. I Hate Change stops by to ask about the color terminal I'd put in his area. He wanted a second one for himself. I didn't understand. We didn't have color terminals, and, even if we did, the application we used didn't do color. Bold, inverse and half intensity, sure, even underline in some places, but not color. No, he insisted that I'd given someone a color terminal, and that he'd show me. So he drags me down to the plant floor, walks me over to the WA160 I'd installed the week before, and points. And some of the text is in color. All the areas the operator needs to read before confirming a job are bright yellow, like they've been highlighted. In fact, exactly like they'd been highlighted. With a highlighter. Because they have been. The yellow highlighter that was used to do it is still sitting next to the keyboard, in fact. I lick my right index finger, rub some of the marker off the monitor, and show him the color has vanished. Still want one? I ask. No. If it's not a color terminal I don't want it. A year later the company did away with all of the terminals, replacing them with PCs. He got Windows NT 4.0, rendered in thousands of beautiful colors, and his chief complaint was that serial connections to the DEC still weren't in color.